Coming up next on I've Got Issues, find out how Kansas families are faring in the ongoing war on poverty. Stay tuned.
This program is brought to you by the Friends of KTWU.
Welcome to I've Got Issues. I'm Janet Thompson-Jackson. As our nation continues to grapple with a sluggish economy, many of us are faced with challenging situations related to our own finances. For some families, it's more challenging than others. On this show, we'll explore some of the resources available to those in need of assistance. It's been 50 years since President Johnson focused attention on the plight of the less fortunate among us as he declared a war on poverty.
Poverty is a national problem requiring improved national organization and support. But this attack, to be effective, must also be organized at the state and the local level and must be supported and directed by state and local efforts. For the war against poverty will not be won here in Washington. It must be won in the field, in every private home, in every public office, from the courthouse to the White House.
President Johnson's war on poverty led to the creation of Medicaid and Medicare, as well as Head Start and other federal programs that provide assistance to children and families. But, as he indicated, a significant degree of responsibility resides at the state and local level. In that regard, we're pleased to be joined by Shannon Katsouretis, the President and CEO of Kansas Action for Children. Shannon, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
You know, there's a startling statistic that in Kansas, almost 1 in 4 children are living in poverty. And I understand that the poverty rate has risen dramatically since, over the last decade, basically, since 2003, from about 12% to, what, 23%?
That's correct. We've seen almost a doubling of the childhood poverty rate in Kansas, and Kansas is in fact outpacing the nation. While the nation as a whole is seeing more children living in poverty, we're seeing that rate rise faster here in Kansas.
Why is that?
I think that's really the million-dollar question. We know more families in Kansas are simply either living in poverty or on the edge of poverty. In part, stagnant economic growth may account for some of that, as well as the growing number of low-wage jobs we have in Kansas.
Now, is there a difference? Is it there are many states that have large rural areas. So does the city-rural dynamic have something to do with that, or is it just generally the state?
I think generally we see growth in childhood poverty across the state. Of course, there are pockets across the state where you see more rapid increases in childhood poverty or concentrations of childhood poverty, but largely this is a statewide problem in Kansas.
Okay. How is poverty actually defined?
So I think typically we define poverty based on the federal poverty level, and for a family of 3 in Kansas, that's $19,530 a year. So we're talking about 3 individuals living on less than $20,000 a year. But I think it's important to keep in mind 2 things when we talk about the definition of poverty. First, that that definition's pretty outdated. It really doesn't allow a family to meet their basic needs. So we're talking about a federal definition that, while it's updated every year, doesn't take into account rising costs in transportation, childcare, other basic needs a family may have. I think it's also important to keep in mind when we talk about poverty that poverty is about more than just dollars and cents. It's also about the social networks and relationships we have. Many families living in poverty don't have some of the social resources that you or I may have to fall back on when they fall upon hard times.
And so what are the consequences for children specifically? What does it mean for a child to be living in poverty?
First and foremost, we know kids that are living in poverty are less likely to access things like good nutrition, health care, high quality early learning opportunities, which really create the foundation for children for later life. We also know those kids are more likely to be overweight or obese because of poor quality nutrition. They're more likely to have learning disabilities, chronic health conditions as adults. We often don't think about the impact long-term of poverty on children, but these are kids that earn less than their peers as adults and are more likely to have heart disease, type 2 diabetes, or other chronic health conditions as a result of their childhood poverty.
So what does Kansas Action for Children, KAC, do to help children, and particularly children in poverty?
So we really work to be a voice for kids in poverty every day at the State House. As policymakers are making decisions, we're looking to make sure they're considering the impact of those decisions on low-income Kansans, protecting things that we would describe as income supports, things like temporary assistance to needy families, which provides cash to families that are struggling with children, things like child care assistance, which helps families that are low income access child care so they can stay in the workforce, and other sorts of employment supports. We protect those programs every day to make sure families can access them, and we also work to increase access to high quality early learning opportunities, which we know is one of the most important things for a child living in poverty. That high quality early learning opportunity can really be the difference when it comes to long-term outcomes.
So let's get into some details and talk about some of your top priorities for this year, for 2014.
As always, in 2014, we'll be seeking to protect the Children's Initiatives Fund to make sure there's full funding for early care and education programs in Kansas.
Well, talk a little bit more about that fund, please.
The Children's Initiatives Fund was created as a result of the master tobacco settlement that many states entered into. I believe that was around 1999. And in Kansas, we made the unique choice to devote 100% of the proceeds of that settlement to children. And largely over the years, that's been devoted to our youngest children, birth to 5. And we also created an endowment with part of those funds. So every year, that's a significant source of revenue that's coming into the state, approximately $60 million in a good year. Mm-hmm. And those monies are going to support early childhood programs, things like Parents as Teachers, what we call the Early Childhood Block Grant, some early childhood health programs like the Newborn Hearing Aid Loaner Program. Mm-hmm. So it supports a very wide range of programs for young children, but every year, given the sizable chunk of revenue that represents, it's a fight to make sure that all of those dollars go to young children in our state, as was intended when that fund was created.
Yeah. Any other priorities that you're focused right now on?
We are specifically focused on childhood poverty, and that work this year is largely focused on temporary assistance to needy families. That is our cash assistance program for families. There is a significant reserve in Kansas, more than 48 million being held in reserves at a time when we're seeing overwhelming growth in poverty in the state. And so we'd like to see some of those reserves. We'd like to make sure that the reserves are spent on core services for low-income families with children, things like child care assistance, cash aid, employment supports, mm-hmm. as opposed to other programs that perhaps are not closely tied to the mission of the TANF program.
Okay. Are there any particular funding concerns that that are on your radar right now? Any cuts that you're concerned about that would impact your programs in particular?
I think the most troubling issue is really around the Children's Initiatives Fund. Every year we have had concerns around the number of dollars that get swept out of that fund for other purposes, mm-hmm. other than the purposes they were intended for, to meet the needs of our youngest children. And so making sure that all of the funds that come into the Children's Initiatives Fund are spent on young children as opposed to being swept out into the state general fund used for other purposes. Last year there was a governor's budget amendment that swept $9.5 million out into the state general fund, and we'd like to avoid that this year. We believe those dollars were committed to young children, and 100% of those funds should go to young children.
Well, Shannon, thanks for all the work that you're doing, and thanks for being here on IGI.
My pleasure.
Coming up next, we'll hear about the services offered by a local organization that provides credit counseling and financial education programs. Stay with us.
You know, the idea that so many children are born into poverty in the wealthiest nation on earth is heartbreaking enough. But the idea that a child may never be able to escape that poverty because she lacks a decent education or health care or a community that views her future as their own, that should offend all of us.
We're
We're joined now by two senior administrators with a nonprofit organization called Housing and Credit Counseling Incorporated, which serves northeastern Kansas with offices in Topeka, Lawrence, and Manhattan. Marilyn Stanley is Chief Operating Officer for the organization, and Bob Mackey is President and Chief Executive Officer. Welcome, Bob and Marilyn.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So, Francine and Jim Bostic were $118,000 in debt, and HCCI, Housing and Credit Counseling, helped them to get out of it. How did you do that?
Well, first of all, they are in the Manhattan area, and so they worked with our counselors in the Manhattan office about 6 years ago or so now. And they came to the counselor and talked about their issues, and did say that they had $118,000, most of which was credit card debt. Wow. They had 13 credit cards, all maxed out. Interestingly enough, they had both had good jobs at Kansas State University, kind of middle management jobs, and it just got away from them. And
and this happened over the course of many years.
A series of years, yes. And so they finally heard about housing and credit counseling, came to our office. Our counselor provided them different options, one of which was filing bankruptcy, of course. If you know Fran and Jim, they're from the old school, and they said, you know, we made these debts, we're going to pay them off. And that's very refreshing. You don't hear that much anymore. So with a debt management plan that we set up for them, and also Fran and Jim getting extra jobs, they managed to pay off all of their debt in a matter of 5.5 years.
Wow.
And as a result, they and we won the Counselor and Counseling Client of the Year, the National Award, 2 years ago. So that was very special for them and for us.
Yeah, well, congratulations, and well-deserved. That's an incredible accomplishment. Yeah. So was the Bostic's level of debt typical, or is that, was it unusual? Or is that pretty widespread?
We have seen other amounts of debt that high, but it is a little bit unusual. The average debt that we see at Housing and Credit Counseling is between $20,000 and $30,000 with about 7 different credit cards.
Okay, and how long generally does it take to pay off that debt?
Through a debt management plan, it takes 3 to 5 years. It's a little bit less with medical and collection debt because they require a much higher monthly payment than credit cards might.
Okay, so we know that you help get people out of debt. What else does HCCI do? What's the scope of your programs?
Well, in addition to providing financial counseling for those who are seeking financial stability in their lives through a series of budgeting and counseling programs, we also do mortgage default, or what we call foreclosure prevention counseling, reverse mortgage, and debt management plan like the Bostics. We also do tenant landlord counseling and education. We do home buyer counseling and education.
Okay, so, Bob, I'm going to slow you down because I want to talk about some of those.
Okay.
All right, let's go back to, people hear a lot about reverse mortgage. First of all, we've seen a lot of foreclosures, so let's talk about foreclosures and reverse mortgage. Can you explain, how do you help people with those processes?
Well, I need to separate the two. Mortgage default, it's when people come in and they are, typically they have lost a job. If there's a family, maybe one or maybe both have lost jobs, or they have run into significant medical debt, and it's not typically because they've just wasted their money or not managed it properly. So typically it's because of a catastrophic situation. So they are able to come in and talk to a credit counselor. Again, we talk to them about a budget, their expenses, their income, but we can also work with the lender and talk to the lender about, you know, we think we have these people down into a situation where it's a manageable budget. We think we can probably get them back on a payment schedule if you can maybe reduce your interest rate or minimum monthly payments, and oftentimes they do. And so there's a lot of things that we can do to help these people out if they come in on time.
Right.
If they're 3 payments behind or more, that's almost a little bit too late. And we had some people come in with a sheriff's letter saying that they're going to be evicted and there will be a sale in 3 days, and that's just too late. So,
well, that's really important to know. So people, if they're 1 or 2 payments behind, there's still time to address that situation.
There is, and we often say, if you think you're going to miss your first payment, you need to come see us.
Yeah, okay.
And they typically know that.
Okay, let's talk about reverse mortgages.
Reverse mortgages, the law changed in October 2005, I believe, and if an individual is contemplating a reverse mortgage, a couple of things. First, they have to be over the age of 62, and they have to have equity in their home. And then what we do is provide counseling to let them know and inform them about the ins and outs of a reverse mortgage, the pros, the cons, the fees, the laws, the guidelines, what can happen if, and so on and so forth. We do not encourage them to take the reverse mortgage. We don't dissuade them from taking the reverse mortgage. All we do is give them information for their own decision. Interesting, when I came to HCCI about 6 years ago, about 30% of the people actually took the reverse mortgage after the counseling session. Now it's about 50 to 60%.
Really?
Yeah, and I think it has a lot to do with people who have retired, and you've read in the paper, as we all have, people are retiring and finding out they don't have enough income, so they're looking at reverse mortgages. They're not for everybody, but if you look at them closely, you go in with your eyes open, it could be a good thing.
Okay. You mentioned landlord-tenant issues. What do you do around those issues?
Well, we teach actually people, tenants and landlords, about their rights and responsibilities based on the Kansas Residential Landlord-Tenant Act. So we're not attorneys, we don't practice law or give legal advice, but there's small things about certain notices and ways to work with your landlord and your neighbors and how to read a lease. Maintenance is the largest problem that people call us about. Sometimes just a written notice to your landlord to repair something makes a world of difference.
Okay, all right. And landlords are willing to work with you?
Yeah,
with these issues?
We actually don't mediate. We help each person to help themselves. So we empower, and that's throughout all of our counseling what we do.
I see, okay. The Better Business Bureau has said the most complaints they've heard in 2013, last year, were dealing with the financial services industry, credit card companies, payday loans, and collection agencies. We don't have a lot of time, but can you just talk about what HCCI does around any of those issues that you care to talk about?
The payday loan sticks out because it is, well, you can drive around town and there are more payday loan places and title places than McDonald's. So, and that's everywhere in the country, really. So a lot of people come to us after they have gotten into a situation where they've gone back to the payday loan place more than one time. You know, if it's just one time, they can probably do that, pay it off. But the average person who takes it out a payday loan, it's out for 6 months.
Right.
That's a tremendous amount of interest and payback. So a lot of times we have people come in trying to pay off those loans to get out of that situation.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that we deal with.
And you're generally able to help them navigate that.
There's usually several. They don't usually come in with just one payday or title loan. Of course, the title loans are a little more tricky because your car is tied to that. Payday loans, they may have 5 or 6 payday loans at different organizations throughout the city. And they may run around every 2 weeks reloaning those loans. And so all of their paycheck is going to interest. One way that we find that helps people that not everyone realizes, they could talk to their banker, they could do a stop payment on those checks, and then make a payment plan on the payday loans.
Okay,
So it becomes a bad debt.
Yeah, well, that's good information for people. Is there any other information that people just generally, if they knew this, they may not get into some of the financial problems that they're getting into? Is there some nugget out there that we can leave with people?
It all goes back to budgeting.
Okay.
You know, we don't learn about budgeting in school or necessarily from our parents, most of us. And so the key of saving for non-monthly expenses, knowing about your credit, and everything you do stays with you for 7 years. So it's emergencies and non-monthly expenses. If you can do that and ask questions, be a good consumer, shop around for the best deal. Don't take the first thing that comes your way. That's something to leave with.
All right. Thanks to both of you for being on IGI.
Thank you for having us.
Next, we'll move on to explore the range of services offered by an organization that provides legal assistance and employment training to low-income residents throughout the state. Stay tuned. People with limited financial resources may feel that they just don't have the means to address matters requiring the assistance of attorneys and legal advocates. They may be surprised to learn what's available through a nonprofit corporation called Kansas Legal Services, which operates throughout the state. Here to tell us about those services is the executive director of that organization, Marilyn Harp, as well as the director of employment training, Leah Vincent. Marilyn and Leah, welcome to IGI.
Thank you.
Your statistics tell us that the Kansas poor have one lawyer for every 9,005 people, while the national average is one lawyer for every 265 people. What accounts for that great discrepancy in numbers?
Well, the availability of attorneys for low-income people is limited, obviously, by the funding, our funding, as well as the potential client's ability to hire an attorney. And so, the more general number is just all attorneys and doesn't take into account the ability to hire. Right.
It's such a large discrepancy.
It is huge.
Yeah. So what impact does that have on the people of Kansas?
Well, you know, the statistic itself is a great impact, but it also makes the assumption that people have the same number of legal problems, wealthy or poor. And in fact, we find that often low-income people have a greater number of legal problems because their financing has their access to funds have other issues. They may encounter evictions more often because of funding problems. They may have more problems with their kids in school, child support matters, a whole variety of things that people of higher means have really money to resolve.
Right. So how does Kansas Legal Services address or respond to this really crisis in the need for legal assistance?
We are fortunate to have a great staff who serve people statewide. We also, and then we have to look at the kinds of problems that people encounter and really target our services.
And many of the lawyers who are helping you are volunteer lawyers doing pro bono work.
It's great that about 500 of the cases we handled this year out of a total of about 26,000 people served. So a real extender of the work we could do were handled by volunteer lawyers who were willing to accept cases and do some of the work that's out there. So the whole community's engaged, the whole legal community's engaged in this effort.
So Leah, we would expect from Kansas Legal Services for you to have programs that offer legal assistance. We wouldn't necessarily expect employment training programs, but you're directing those programs. Can you tell us about those programs and how all that got started?
Well, yes, I think it's very unique that Kansas Legal Services does have the employment training programs there. There is a direct relationship between low-income Kansans and employment skills and their employability, and so that's how this division got started.
Okay. And tell us about the different programs that you're running.
Currently, right now in Topeka, we have 4 different programs. All of them have the outcome of employment. Custom computer training is one of the programs. We have a contract with Department for Children and Families and Vocational Rehabilitation Services. Students come to us with either some computer skills, maybe none, or maybe they just need to learn a new program or update their skills. And they can learn Microsoft Office programs, internet, email, even in just increasing their keyboarding. They also walk out of there with a resume, a cover letter, mock interviews and such. And if the case manager that sent them there would request it, we also help them do job search as well. The Topeka Moving Ahead program, also known as TMAP, is a 13-week program that we help individuals who are homeless, and they are referred by the Topeka Rescue Mission or a women's shelter. They come to us with low self-esteem, their confidence level isn't very high, they don't really have a big expectation, and they come into the class, up to 12 people at once, and they start to form a relationship almost the first day.
Yeah, a community.
Definitely. And especially since they're all living at the rescue mission, they start taking care of each other. If someone feels down, doesn't feel like coming to class, they're like, nope, come on, let's go. We're all going. They have that sense of family and that they all want to end up graduating together.
Yeah.
We also help them build their wardrobe for their career. We help them with haircuts, you name it.
Head to toe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We pretty much help with everything, and if we can't find it, then we find a resource that will help them with that. And we are just a floor away from our legal department, and they assist our clients as well with their legal issues.
What other types of cases does KLS take?
About 50% of our cases are family law cases of all matter, and many of those unfortunately involve domestic violence. So that the safety of our client and children in the household are maintained through that kind of work. But we also work with folks who are not able to be in the job market as their source of income, but need to apply for disability benefits. We have a program that works with senior citizens and focuses on, we sometimes forget that one of the big targets of the war on poverty 50 years ago was about the huge number of senior citizens that were in poverty before there was Medicare and Medicaid, because they had Social Security as income for about 20 years. That program was about 20 years old, but much of that money was going to meet their health care costs. And so Medicare and Medicaid came in as some of those initial programs.
And you actually have an elder law program, don't you?
We do.
Yeah.
We work with the area agencies on aging throughout the state and prioritize seniors in greatest social and economic need through that program.
Is there anything else that you'd like us to know about what services are offered or the needs that you have?
Well, we do have quite a lot of information about legal matters available on our website, and it really is out there to make legal information available to the public. So.
And do you need some more volunteer lawyers?
Absolutely. The Supreme Court has changed a rule this year so that lawyers, retired lawyers, you don't have to keep your license active to volunteer with us. And so we call that our emeritus program. And we have some inactive lawyers, lawyers staying home with kids who might want to spend a half a day a week.
Yeah.
Or getting back in the job market, or retired lawyers. And we look to make a good match between their interests and what we do.
Great opportunities for them and for you.
Yeah,
Marilyn, Leah, thank you so much for being with us on IGI.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for this show. If you have any suggestions for a topic you'd like us to consider, send us an email or write to us on the address on your screen. And if you'd like to view this show again, it's available online at watch.ktwu.org, where you can find many other local and national productions. For I've Got Issues, I'm Janet Thompson-Jackson. Thanks for being with us.
This program has been brought to you by the Friends of KTWU.